All right. We heard from Clay that they will be late. Did we hear from anyone else?
I'll check again, but no,
I don't see anything in my email.
no, I have nothing else.
All right. Well, then let's get started. We can start with agenda and materials review. Does everything look good? We have a training topic and then a break and then a case. That's kind of the main stuff. Looks good. Okay. Minutes approval. Has anyone had a chance to look at it? Any changes? Do we have our a minutes taker? I don't see it.
I can't tell.
We just have phone calls, right?
At the very least, this is recorded and I can get her the recording and she can craft minutes from that.
Okay. Are there any changes to make to the minutes? No? Okay. Sounds good. Do we move to approve them? Or do we just approve them? I should know this by now. I really don't.
Probably you should ask for a motion. I need to abstain because I wasn't at the meeting, but I mean, if you're asking, I think probably yes,
Okay, Michael or Bernadette?
But I'm not trying to impose my, view. It's just my view. So
I will move that we accept the minutes.
Bernadette seconded non-verbally. So I will also agree with that, which means that we are approving them because that's the three of us. And then we have comments from board members and commission liaisons. So Michael, you are still the police commission liaison.
Yes, I am. The police commission met last week. I had hoped to be up here because they did meet hybridly. They did meet in a hybrid format, and but I was not able to make it up because I was detained in LA for a few more days. So, but I was there on Zoom. We had a great revisiting of the de-escalation policy, which we had discussed the month before, I think after the CRB meeting. So both of those discussions have happened since our last CRB meeting. And they were very productive conversations, I think. There was a lot of feedback on de-escalation, a lot of discussion of the de-escalation. From a CRB perspective, I brought up last month the fact that we talk about the de-escalation policies often on the CRB, even when it's not one of the it's not part of the allegations. It still sometimes comes up, and I sort of went through, looking at the EPD policy and then comparing it with other kinds of policies. I sort of mentioned that it was confusing to an outsider reading the EPD policy because it's was very pared down and was written from a tactical perspective rather than from other kinds of perspectives. And Chief Skinner said that was useful feedback. They went, the EPD folks went back and within a month came back with a bunch of revisions that I think made it much less confusing to me as a CRB member, sort of reading that policy and trying to match it up to police conduct. So hopefully those revisions, I think there was some more feedback on those, but hopefully there will be a revised and more concrete and fleshed out de-escalation policy in the future. So look forward to that. I'm trying to think what was the other. I think that was the main thing that event that's taken place. So.
Thank you.
Carolyn, can I jump in for just a second?
Yes, please.
So sorry, Lydia is one of our call-in folks, and so she also emailed me and let me know that she was having trouble with the passcode. So I put that information in the chat, but just I'm gonna check the agenda, but it's capital C, capital R, capital B, capital J, lowercase UN, 2022. So, and that information's in the chat, and I will stop talking now.
Okay. Thanks. Michael, was that all you had? You didn't have any other comments outside of the commission comments?
I don't think so. We do a closing round too, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll save everything else for then.
All right. I will put our speaking order in the chat, but next will be Alan.
Did I hear next would be Alan?
Yeah, sorry, did I not see that clearly?
For just comments from board members. Oh, okay. Sorry, I was thinking liaisons. Thank you, Michael, for serving as liaison to the police commission. And thank you all for the absentee appointment. I will not miss meetings for that reason. No. Hey, happy to be back, at least on the Zoom. And that's it. Thank you.
I didn't type fast enough. Bernadette, you're next.
I think the only thing I have to say is I thought the tour of the evidence locker room and property room was very informative and very good. I was disappointed that Clay and I were the only members that were there, that we were outnumbered by presenters from the department. I think that's kind of disappointing. I had been there before, so I mean, most of it was not new to me. I appreciated Cindy being there, helping usher us through. The presentation was great. The information we got, just seeing the space and how it's used by the police and the separation and the care that goes into all the evidence that comes in and property that comes in that might not be evidence, how it's taken care of and accounted for. So I appreciate Cindy and everybody getting that set up for us. I appreciate that Lindsay and Rob were there as well. And so thank you all for that.
I don't think I have any comments. I am wondering though, if we have applicants, where are we in the getting new members?
I can, yeah, I'll answer that. Sorry. So council met last night and selected, reselected Bernadette. Thank you, Bernadette. And then Rick Rosetta and Lindsay, I'm looking for your email. So if you get it before me, Monique Griffin. So we will be reaching out to them this week and trying to start up and their onboarding process. It is unlikely, just given sort of the late date at which CR or council approved them, it's unlikely we'll have them fully backgrounded before the July meeting. But yeah, we're looking forward to having those folks on. For those of you who don't know, Rick was on before. So
Does
Yes,
Bernadette's background carry over?
No.
Oh, okay. Really?
I don't think so. I don't know. Bernadette, did yours?
That's what I'm asking. Did Bernadette? Will Bernadette's?
Well, I would think it would.
Okay, sorry.
Otherwise,
Bernadette's will. I heard Rick's. I don't know if Rick's will.
okay, because otherwise I would be a little concerned that we wouldn't have a quorum to meet in July.
Yeah, no, you're fine. Yours will stick around. Yours is all set.
Okay.
Yeah.
When I had a discontiguous appointment, I had to go through it again. But when I was reappointed, I did not have to go through it again. So I think if the past is consistent with the present, only Rick should have to redo his.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Thanks for that update. Who's next? Jose.
Hello, everybody. I'm steering the ship without my first mate tonight, so to speak. So I will be on and off the camera, but I've got wireless headphones so I can hear everything. So if the house is at risk of burning down, I'll just be stepping away, but I will be here as well too. I wish I could have made the evidence meeting, the meeting at evidence last month. But yeah, life is contingent with little kids. Super glad to hear that we'll be seeing Rick Rosetta's face again. And yeah, glad to hear that we'll have some new members as well. Yeah, we'll have a lot to say about the case this week.
And Clay, just comments from board members.
Sure. Yeah. Hi, I'm sorry I was a little late. Now with this working in the office and then Zoom meetings, it's a little challenging to make it places. I think biking from my office to my house is about exactly 25 or 30 minutes. So I hope at some point we'll be able to meet in person because that might be easier for me. Yeah, I will echo Bernadette's comments that it was a great tour. I learned a lot about that particular function of the police bureau, and I found it to be both enlightening for their procedures and reassuring in terms of the diligence with which they work. So it was a really good tour to be on, and they were super available for our questions when we had them, and really detail oriented with their work and showing us how they work. So I appreciated the opportunity to do that.
All right, thank you. Now it is time for public comment. Do we have any public comment? Looks like we have a phone and then,
The phone is Lydia, and then I'm not seeing Majeska. If you want to do public comment, you can do the raising hand thing, and we can do that. But barring any hands, I think we can move forward. I do want to just quickly mention that so we looked into getting, there's a city room. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry, a meeting room that's equipped for hybrid meetings. We are required to continue, because we do have public comment, we are required to have a hybrid option so folks can submit public comment virtually. So we tried to get in that room and couldn't. So I apologize for still being on Zoom. I can include something in my auditor's report more about future meeting spaces, but that's where we are right now.
okay. So no public comment. We have a training topic. Is that Ryan?
Yeah, that's Ryan. So waiting for Ryan to turn, there he is. I don't have to introduce him because you guys know him, but Carolyn reached out and asked if we could have a discussion around school safety after the tragedy in Uvalde in Texas. And so Ryan was formerly the head of the school resource officer team and has a lot of training and grounding in this. And so I thought it would be helpful for him to come and do a presentation and Q&A around school safety here. Thanks, Ryan.
Yep, you bet. I don't have like a formal presentation set up, and I was hoping we could make this kind of a discussion thing, but I just kind of want to, excuse me, sorry, wanted to start out with just talking about the different ways that we search, like if we're looking for people or looking for bad people or looking for dangerous people or armed people or whatever. So up until like Columbine-ish, we had really one way that we searched, and it was slow and methodical, and we still do that in different situations. Like for example, if we get sent to a burglary or like say a business that had somebody who broke into the business, or even a school for that matter, somebody broke into the school after hours or something along those lines, we would wait for enough officers to respond to that location. We'd set a perimeter around it to make sure, like if anybody left, we'd be able to pick them up. And again, I'm emphasizing here, this is not a situation where we're worried about somebody getting hurt or anybody who's inside being taken hostage or anything violent happening. And we'd set that perimeter around the building. That way, if somebody got loose, that somebody would be able to catch them. We'd get enough officers there, and we'd go into that building and we would slowly, methodically search through it. So we wouldn't go past any doors. We would go try every door. If it was locked, we'd try to get a way to get into it. But we would move through the whole room. Any closets, we'd go through closets. We'd look under anything where somebody could be hiding, and we would do that room by room. And so that way, anything we left behind us, we would know that it was searched thoroughly, and there's a very, very unlikely that somebody would be inside of that room. After Columbine and after things, started changing from there, there was a lot of discussion nationally about changing the tactics and and how we do active threat or active killer, or however you want to call it. There's multiple names for it. How we respond to those things. And what's come about from that is, and this is EPD's training as well, and it really, it's fairly consistent nationally. Obviously, there's some differences in some places, but if we go respond to a place where we know there's an active threat, or people are getting, well, for example, school shooting, let's just use that because that's kind of why we're here, right? Then it's expected that we're going to go in. Like, if there's one officer that shows up, that officer is going to go in. If there's two officers that show up at the same time or coming in at the same time, you might wait a split second for the other officer to come in with you. But the way we train that is that we go towards the sounds. So, for example, like if we hear gunfire, that's the sound we're going towards. If we hear yelling and screaming and crying, that's the sound we're going for. We're passing other rooms, other places, potentially putting ourselves in a position where we have an armed bad guy behind us, but we're going towards where it sounds like the active threat might be. And the hard part in those situations too is, especially in a school or in a mall or a setting where there's a lot of people, is that folks are trying to grab a hold of you, and there's people that you're going to be going to pass potentially who are injured or who are bleeding, and we're passing them because we want to get to the point where we are able to stop that threat, whether it be us stopping it or a lot of these end up in suicides, but whatever it may be, them barricading themselves in a bathroom and us getting in a gunfight with them, whatever that situation might look like, we want to stop that threat. And then we've done a really good job here at EPD working with the fire department directly. So we have done multiple trainings, like live trainings with them, where it used to be in the beginning, it was hard to get them to come along. They didn't want to be there because they wanted to make sure that, there was no concern for safety for any of them. And I understand that they have a different priority on how they handle things, but like they wanted to know for absolute certainty that building's been searched before any of their personnel are going to go in, and they're not going to respond in there until we can tell them that the threat's been taken out or it's no longer there, or whatever that might look like. But we have, over the last several years, worked with the fire department directly, and we've kind of got a little bit of a hybrid plan, and we've got them to the point where they're actually willing. We can take a pot of officers into an area where, if we think it's a big building, we think the threat's still active, but it's active, on the other end of this building or complex, and we've got officers over there trying to deal with that, but we've got injured people in a different portion of that complex. We'll take a pot of officers, and they're willing to come in and provide medical attention to anybody who may be injured in that area, even though we're telling them that there still is an active threat. We basically surround them and protect them, so that they can do their job and come in and do that. So I think that's the biggest differentiation between the two different ways that we search buildings and the reasons why we search them that way. But absolutely has been I've been here 20 years, and it's changed and evolved, but that's kind of the way we've been training ever since. And it's not just schools. It could be a mall. It could be any situation where there's people who, even a household where there's somebody, with a firearm inside that's threatening people or actively hurting people. That's how we will respond to it. It's an immediate response in the door. And then we make dynamic entries into the classrooms. So like we typically will try to have two people. So when we go into the classroom, like one person will cut off this direction, the other cut off this direction. So it diverts attention to whoever's in that classroom. And it's much harder for them, to return fire to two officers coming in two separate directions. It gives us a better opportunity. But that's kind of the gist of how we do it. And I expect that you guys are going to have some questions. So I wanted to make sure that we had plenty of time for that too. So fire away.
Go ahead, Bernadette.
So it used to be, when you were in charge of the school resource officer unit, there was an officer stationed basically at every high school, but for that region. And now school resource officers are no longer a thing in 4J. So I'm wondering, what's going to be the response time, if any, change from when you guys were in the schools, as opposed to how an emergency calls in and gets dispatched through the regular 911 sorts of stuff?
And are you talking like for an active shooter type situation, Bernadette, or what type of a call are you talking about here? Just like,
let's talk worst case scenario, active
Okay.
shooter,
Sure.
and then we can go down from that to, the person walking around with bullet armored stuff on
Sure.
their bodies, walking around schools and wondering who's going to come and respond and talk to that person.
Sure. Yeah, good question. Yes, we did used to have an officer at every school, at every high school, I should say, for each region. You're right. That no longer exists. So it's difficult to answer your question with a number because it's really going to depend. Like if this call comes in and there's an officer right around the corner, it's going to be a quick response. I can tell you this though, I was there for Cascade shooting, and everybody showed up. Like if that event takes place, everybody shows up, not just EPD, but we had county, we had Oregon State Police, I think we had some FBI folks that showed up, and not because we called them, because they heard about it. So it literally is an all hands on deck, and jurisdictions don't matter in situations like that. And I've experienced that. So I know that's true. But anybody who hears that going on will come to help and assist. Dropping it down to your next scenario with somebody who's walking around with body armor or whatever around a school, that's certainly going to take priority at our dispatch. I mean, that's going to be something that we'll dispatch immediately. And again, that just depends on where somebody may be in their location as far as how close they are to the school itself. I mean, if it's at a high school, it's certainly going to be less of a response or more time than it would have been when we had folks stationed there, but it's still going to be a high priority for our dispatch center.
Do you, if I can follow up, just since nobody else got a hand up, do you have any concerns the fact that there's not school resource officers, so officers now coming up aren't going to have as much familiarity with schools, school buildings, the layouts? I mean, because you know how weird some of the buildings are in 4J. I mean, do you have any concerns that school resource officers, that there's I don't know how to say it, that the safety is compromised in our schools now, not having the school resource officer program?
Well, I can say like anything. I mean, if I go into a building I know and something is going on, then I know the layout of it. I know how to get around, and I might know of a hallway that, cuts me across to a different section of where I need to be. That's a faster, safer, whatever, reason to get over there. And if I don't know that building, then yeah, it could delay me. It could, it could cause me to get confused on where I might be. So, I mean, it's just like anything, familiarity is obviously, you benefit from that.
I have a question. It's sort of to follow up on that, but I am, I'm a little removed from from 4J. But when that decision was made to not have school resource officers, so I guess what has it looked like this year as far as training? Are there trainings where you guys are at the schools getting to know the building? Like, what is the interaction with 4J after the decision last year? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I still am on 4J's threat assessment team. I had gone through, basically I helped set the team up, and it's based off of the Salem Kaiser model, and it's a nationally known model. So when the resource officers were released, then they still needed a representative from the police department. So it just made sense for me to stay on that. So I have some involvement in that piece of it. The district has come in, they've got a little bit of time at in-service to talk about that threat assessment team and basically what they're doing, and asking for referrals if they run across students who might fit that model that need some extra assistance. But absent that, there hasn't been anything else.
Go ahead, Michael.
Thank you. I just wanted, so I forgot this was the other topic of conversation at the police commission last week, and I do remember Chief saying got a question about the willingness of or something about local schools in 4J and their ongoing relationship to EPD, and he indicated that there's still a very good productive relationship with all of the sort of I guess administration at each of the schools. Is that your sense as well?
Yeah, I mean, I have the opportunity to talk to quite a few of them, you know, through the threat assessment thing, and then I just run into them because I had relationships with them because of, you know, the position I was in, and I've had nothing but positive interactions with them for sure.
And then just to clarify for anybody who doesn't know, Bethel still has, I guess, Navash is a youth services officer, but is that different? I guess I assume it's not, but
No, it actually, the interesting thing was I put together a proposal right before we ended up losing the contract with them, and that's, I wanted to rename it to youth services. And we were working on getting a detective assigned to our unit as well for, you know, some of the bigger sex crime cases and stuff like that that come out of the high school, to dedicated to that, just the schools. But again, that all came apart. But yes, Bethel does have one, and that's based off of, like I said, that proposal that I had sent in was to rename youth services. And it's also a softer looking uniform, so it's slacks and a polo shirt with a vest underneath. Typically you can wear an outer vest if you want to, but yeah, that was kind of the direction we were headed. But they just have one is all, one officer over there, which has been a little difficult for her because, you know, she kind of feels like she's on an island. And she can get help when she needs it, you know, from patrol, but you know, patrol is pretty busy. But the nice thing is anytime an officer needs assistance, usually that doesn't take very long. It isn't a big long delay for that. You're muted, Carolyn.
I lowered my hand, but forgot to unmute. I have a couple questions. The first one I think is more about kind of the first thing you were talking about, and then kind of circling back to what you're talking about now. But when you're talking about the practice of what you do when you try to go into a school during an active shooter or something like that, are there actual policies about that would show that, like, if an officer doesn't do this, then there could be ramifications? Because the thing that really stands out to me is, you know, you hear these stories of the officers who just stood around and didn't go in. So I'm wondering how we can ensure that EPD officers wouldn't do that.
Yeah, Leah, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I don't know of any policy related to that specifically. But I mean, we always have, you know, our judgment and performance policies as well that could potentially, depending upon how egregious it was, could fit into a category like that.
neglect of duty comes to mind.
Yeah, that's too. Yep.
Okay.
But
And
yeah,
you think-
nothing specific to an active shooter situation that I know of.
No, me neither.
do you think in the EPD culture that would be something that would have stood out to you all in that situation?
Say that again. I want to make sure I understand what you're asking. Sorry.
Just with the culture of EPD in your office and Leah's office, if that had happened here, Leah nodded, so I assume that that's the case, that there would be allegations and it would have been dealt with.
So yeah, I hesitate a little bit to answer that question because like, as you guys all know, I do full investigations. Like I do but very comprehensive interviews, all this kind of stuff. And I don't have all of that in this case. I mean, I have what's been little bits and pieces that have come out, but I also understand too that because I've been doing this for so long, like most of the stuff that I learned would never be released to the media either. So I would say that if we did an investigation and it was determined that somebody was supposed to have gone in, and our expectation was for them to have gone in and they chose not to, I absolutely would say that would be looked at, and Lee is the one who does the allegations, obviously, but my expectation is that there would be allegations against someone. I just don't want to say, because I haven't done the investigation on this one, because there's probably a lot of pieces to it that I'm not aware of, but on the face value, I definitely have concerns.
Absolutely. Okay.
I think, and I know Bernadette's got a question and I don't want to interrupt, but I want to be clear that I don't know what happened in Texas yet. I'm very glad that they're doing a DOJ investigation because I think that'll help clear things up, and they don't have oversight, so they don't have any other way of doing it in a really public and transparent way. And from what I've read there, if hypothetically there was a situation where I expected someone to act and they didn't act, then that's definitely something that I've opened. I mean, not in an active shooter situation, but we definitely opened investigations around that before. I think you guys reviewed one pretty recently too, where there was a crime and the officer just didn't take appropriate action, right? So that's definitely something that we would look at.
Okay. Bernadette.
Okay, so I think that crux that I'm hearing out of Texas is they have a police chief for their school district. We don't call it a police chief in 4J. So I guess it's a chain of command question. And the U of O, they also have their own police department. So I know when, jurisdictions are setting up and they're helping each other out, obviously somebody from the jurisdiction is the lead. So if something happens on the U of O campus, one would presume that they take the lead and therefore you guys follow their commands. And does that take precedence over your policies? And then I guess then the question is if the school district has I don't even know what here we're talking about the chief of police and the chief of police wife making the decision. I would hope that it would be kind of coordinated somehow. But those two might not always be in these positions. But since the 4J school district is not a police department similar to the U of O, do they get to make the decision as to how an active shooter is handled? If you know, and compare that to the University of Oregon or LCC, I think they don't have a police department, but in those three jurisdictions, those three situations, all within Eugene's jurisdiction. I mean, how does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah. So when we're working with other agencies, we're required to follow our own policy. We don't get to deviate from our policy because of the way they do things. So that is pretty clear. That's clear in our policy. It talks about interagency agreements, and if we're working with other agencies, that expectation of our employees is that we follow our policies. And even to the point where, I mean, you're talking about how do I put this? So, something that's not life-threatening along those lines, we're gonna try to, do what it's their agency, right? It's their area. We're gonna follow what they would like us to do, as long as we're not violating policy. But if you've got a situation that it's life-threatening and you feel like something needs to be done differently, they aren't our boss. It is their agency, but they're not really our boss. So I guess the only time, it'd be rare, but in an active shooter situation, if we responded and we felt like there was we should be doing something different in this, my expectation, and as a supervisor, I would be like, hey, I respect what you're saying here, but this is what we're going to do. And we would go do it the way we think it needs to be done. Second question, and hopefully that answered that enough for you.
Yeah, I guess the question was, is there a distinction between an agency that has a police department versus an agency that doesn't have a police department?
Okay, I think I was going to get this on your second one. So like, okay. You talked about, could 4J determine how he responded to something like this? No, they couldn't. We're going to go in and we're going to protect lives and property like we always do. Yeah, so that's our situation. Like, for example, like the Cascade shooting, we went in, did our thing, and then we said, this area is ours. We need this for evidence collection and in our investigation. The rest of the school is yours. You can do whatever you want with it, kind of a thing. So, but when the active threat is happening, when that's going on, that's for us to deal with. And then we'll provide them everything else that they can have after that threat is gone.
Okay, and so, but if it happens at U of O, is there a difference between, yes, you have to follow your policies, but is there a difference in how you would interact with them, or no?
Well, we would attempt to have them be the lead because it's their agency and it's their jurisdiction, right? But as a supervisor, if I'm going to respond to something like that and I see that things are not being done correctly, I'm going to direct my folks to do what needs to be done correctly. So yes, we respect that, and that is definitely what we want to do. But if there's a glaring issue that's going on, I'm not going to just sit there and ignore it. I'm going to either talk to somebody and try to get it fixed, or I'm going to direct my folks to do what I think needs to be done.
Oh, that was good to hear. Thank you. I was muted.
Oh, no problem. I read your lips. I got it.
Okay.
You're welcome.
I'll do my second part of my question now, because I appreciate Bernadette you following up, because that was on topic and I would have changed the topic. So anyhow, it's interesting as a former 4J employee and current U of O employee to hear this conversation and think about like how my life could be affected by all this. So Bernadette, those are good questions. So my other question is more about kind of the day-to-day things that police officers can do to support 4J in a normal way. Because I remember when I worked in a middle school, we often had our like high school region officer come into the school to deal with behavioral issues and drug issues and stuff like that. So that those kinds of things are still happening in the schools, I imagine. I'm not there anymore, so I don't know. But how is that being handled? Do you have people who are kind of the go-tos for that, or is it just whoever's on call? And
Yeah, no, it's I mean, since the contract was terminated, they call in non-emergency or 911 depending upon the severity of what's going on, and it takes priority just like with every other call within the city of Eugene. So there's a lot of times where, you know, some of that stuff sits all day long, and sometimes it sits for a couple days before it gets a response. But yeah, before Carolyn was explaining, and I know some of us know this, but what had happened before was each SRO that I had was in a region, so like North Eugene, and then they also took care of all the schools, the middle schools and elementary schools within that region. And so we'd have North and South and Willamette and, you know, Churchill and all of those. And then that resource officer would handle calls in each one of the feeder schools that went into that high school. But now all those calls end up going to non-emergency and sits in the queue. It gets prioritized just like every other call that comes in.
have you received feedback from 4J administration about that at all, or?
There are a lot of folks over there that would really miss having that response, because it was a relationship response or a relationship contract, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it. But there were a lot of things that they asked us to do as police officers that if you call non-emergency, they wouldn't do it. And we did it just because we had a relationship built and they had a contract with them. So I mean, for example, like they'd be concerned, they'd have some parents that were upset and frustrated and irritated, and they had some safety concerns, and they're like, hey, they got to come in for this meeting. Would you guys be willing to have somebody come over to the office and just stand by? And that's not something you're going to get a response with if you call the non-emergency number, but we would do that for them, again, because of the relationship we had.
Go ahead, Clay.
I was just wondering if you know of anyone who is tracking outcomes after the change or before the change for youth. Just thinking about whether, you know, there are arrest records that were tracked before that would be comparable now, or truancy violations that were enforced or anything like that.
So
it might not be the police. It might be some nonprofit, you know, that's doing that.
So we did track that. We had a lot of numbers that we put together on that before the contract was over, as far as the types of arrests, types of contacts, that kind of thing that the officers did at the schools. Since then, I don't know. And it'd be hard to. I'm sure so we've got our folks that do all the crime analysis stuff, and I'm sure there's some searches that they could do, but it was much easier when you had dedicated officers, so we could look at all of their activity, right? So now it's just random people that are going to be dispatched to the schools. I'm sure they could pull those numbers and look and see like how many times somebody responded to each one of the high schools, middle schools, elementary schools, and then what the outcome of that response was. But I don't know that that's being tracked. I think it's possible for it to be tracked. It just have to be a conversation with one of our analysis folks, crime analysis folks.
Yeah, it's interesting because this is such a community-wide conversation about, you know, how do you approach safety in schools, and what's the right approach that's not also criminalizing youth in a way that's you know, not necessarily about prevention. And so it's hard for us as a board, but I'm just curious if there's, you know, outcomes that we would be concerned about as a board, you know, seeing drop in outcomes and being able to make recommendations about that, or if there's relationship, if the relationship was strong before and now police interaction with youth is worse because there's not a relationship within the school, you know, and is that, you know, a policy consideration to think
Well,
about?
it'd be interesting too, because I think it'd be hard to compare those numbers because like I said earlier, you know, there were a lot of things that we would respond to because the district asked us to respond to them.
Mhm.
Whereas now the district, if they called non-emergency, they wouldn't get an officer to respond to it. So it'd be hard to look at those numbers and see how accurate they might be, because I think the types of things that officers responded to at the school's request are going to be different than what they look like now, because they just won't get that response.
Right.
I
And I
have
think,
Oh, go ahead.
sorry.
Frank, sorry. No, Clay, you.
well, what's interesting about that is that, you know, if you put on the advocate's hat for people who were interested in removing school officers from schools, then I think they would understand that as a positive thing, because maybe those things can be handled without police intervention, you know, and I'm not saying that that's the case, but it's just such a complex conversation, and we have a need, you know, there may have been, you know, an inclination to include police in conversations that they didn't need to be included in previously, and now it's harder, and so probably they aren't. But I mean, that's a whole rich topic that.
Sure. Yeah, we were really careful about making sure we were not involved in any type of disciplinary stuff or any of those types of conversations.
Yeah.
And my folks, I mean, all the training that we had on it was really clear that that's where we get out. But to your point, Clay, you know, if the district calls us or the principal calls us and says, "Hey, I want you to deal with this MIP marijuana or whatever," then, you know, that's not us making that decision. It's the school district making that decision. So. Right. We would respond and we would handle it the way we handle it.
Absolutely.
So yeah, it would be interesting to see the numbers, but there's a lot of variables in what those numbers might necessarily mean, just because of the differences and the changes that have been there. But yeah,
totally. Thanks for going down that.
Yeah, of course. You bet.
I was just going to say two things. One, Clay, the police have never responded in 4J to truancy. There's an actual truancy officer that's hired by 4J who handles all of those sorts of things. So as far as I know, the school resource officers never got involved unless there was a concern by the truancy officer going out to a house that there was a safety concern there. And I know from my perspective, when officers were called to things that dispatch would not send them to, it was oftentimes a parent showing up intoxicated that we were concerned about, or a parent that didn't have custodial rights showing up at the school. And it was one of those things that we have secure, I can't remember what the term is called for them now. I mean, we have safety officers, I guess they're called.
That's it.
Now that, yeah. And we can call them. Unfortunately, many of them are on bikes, so it takes a while to get there. And they don't have the background and experience in de-escalation training. So to ask them to come and hang out with maybe a parent who's intoxicated, trying to pick up their kid, it's somewhat problematic, or they don't have custody. And so it's from an elementary school perspective, that's a concern. And I get the concerns that people have of, you know, criminalizing the kids in the middle school. But, you know, I've also talked with a lot of the resource officers, and the relationships they have with the kids, you know, was pretty good. Is how in the conversations I've had with students and the ones with the officers. So I think sometimes parents not being on campus all the time have a perspective as to what the officers were doing on campuses that might not always been true, at least from my perspective. I mean, I'm sure in some places it was true, but it's a pretty complicated situation. And, you know, I certainly miss the ability to have an officer show up at my school when I have a concern for a student's safety that dispatch wouldn't come out for.
Clay, do you still have something, or is your hand just still up? Sorry, I'm
Sorry,
just
my
trying to
hand-
keep it in the
And
order.
it's still just up.
Um, So I have a question. Maybe Bernadette knows more than Ryan, or maybe both do. I've seen the fancy like school safety officer, school safety cars. Is that, so that's not connected to police at all? That's all 4J employees who have minimal training? Is that?
Yeah, that's all 4J employees. It's their school safety officers. And I couldn't speak to the training that they've had. I wasn't a part of it. I wasn't involved in any of it, so I don't know.
Okay, Bernadette, do you know?
Well, I know one of them that we've had has always been just a campus safety officer that was there even when there were school resource officers. And so they just kind of roamed the halls, make sure kids were, going where they're supposed to be going, that they, if there was an altercation or, an incident between a couple of kids, they would try and help them kind of, cool down and, go their separate ways. So they were just kind of like I want to say like a roaming counselor in some ways, and an attendant on campus, but they stayed only at the high schools, as far as I know. There was their middle school. I mean, I think some middle schools also had a safety officer, but the elementary schools didn't have one. And so now, they come out and visit, from time to time. They check doors to make sure the doors are locked, the gates are locked, that there aren't any security concerns or breaches. All the tents that are out at all the elementary schools for eating outside aren't going to topple in front of top of the kids that are there. We probably couldn't have gotten Ryan to come out and check our tents for us. He probably would have balked at that. But there's also the school resource officers left in 2020. I think it was January 2020. And then we went into COVID in March of 2020. And so we're just now coming out of, COVID. I mean, I guess we've been in school this year, but it's certainly been different. The concerns on campuses are completely different now, I think, than they were pre-COVID. I think student safety is a different perspective. I think it's more self-concern, self-safety than it is the outside world active shooter. But obviously with Texas, the outside active shooter is also a concern. But I certainly think most of the stuff that's coming to us for student safety is from a suicide prevention, mental health care concern than anything.
Thank you. Michael.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on a couple of things that I heard. So Bernadette, I might have misheard, but I thought you said that you were concerned that there might be officers responding that wouldn't have de-escalation training.
Our school safety officers
Gotcha.
don't have the de-escalation training that the police department has.
Okay, and so I'm just because there's a lot of terms going around. So school safety officers here are not EPD employees.
Correct.
No, there's
All
right.
right.
Ryan supervised
Because I know
SROs, school resource officers, which were police officers. Now we have safety officers for campus
Yes.
safety.
I get it now. There are different jurisdictions that use different terms, and so sometimes school resource officers are not called school resource officers; they're called school safety officers. So I just wanted to be sure I was hearing it all correctly. So that's interesting. I mean, I would hope that that anyone working in schools would have some kind of training around that. And this obviously isn't our we don't provide oversight for that. So someone else should be having conversations with people about that. I would hope that they receive some kind of training like that. They're not post certified then, right? They don't go through any. Okay, interesting.
I do believe they have. I don't know if this happened or not, but there was a discussion early on that they were going to actually go through. I think they all did. To tell you the truth, I could be wrong on this, but I think they all went through like a private security certification that's certified through DPSST, which is the same agency that certifies police officers. I know that was the plan, and I think it might have happened, but I'm not 100% sure on that. So I don't know.
Gotcha. And that probably, because my sense is de-escalation is something that EPD adds in, but I'm not, is that also, that's not done by DPSS. I can't remember all the letters.
All the acronyms. Yeah, exactly. It's okay. Trust me, it's fine. You could start spouting off a bunch, I'm sure, in your career, and I wouldn't know either. So, yeah. So DPSST does teach de-escalation to all the new recruits. I mean, that's part of their curriculum. But then each agency gets to choose what they want their an individual policy to look like and their individual training to look like at their agency.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then I think that sort of resolved all of the other questions I had. So
The 4J cars for those safety officers are fancy if you've seen them driving around town. So just be on the lookout for them.
Very bright.
It's got quite the wrap on it, that's for sure.
To wonder about funding, but that's another issue that we won't go into right now.
The
Is there
wraps aren't too terribly expensive, but yeah, they definitely have a lot of graphics on them.
I think they're brand new cars. We don't need to go there. We don't need to go there.
They are.
I think we should move on. Are there any other final questions?
I have a comment, not a question.
Then that's acceptable.
Oh, all right. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I was going to talk more about this later, but the week after Uvalde, I went to the Police Executive Research Forum conference. And it's a meeting of sort of more of the progressive chiefs, and there's a major cities chiefs conference and a whole bunch of stuff, and it's a cop conference, right? I don't tend to make a whole lot of friends there, but it's always very interesting. So, and obviously one of the main things we just kept talking about was gun violence and mass shootings, but also the day-to-day increase in gun violence. And it was incredibly, it was upsetting just to talk about it so much, but also really interesting to me that all of the major city chiefs were in favor of gun control laws and pushing on a federal level for more control around these weapons. And one of the discussions that we definitely also talked a lot about was the SRO issue, because, you know, as Bernadette was saying, it was sort of early 2020, like through 2020, and there was sort of a movement in many cities to get to not have SROs in their schools, school resource officers, sorry, police officers in schools. And a couple of the places talked about, it seemed like the trend was moving back towards having some level of like school resource officer light. So kind of like what Ryan was pushing with earlier with the youth services officers, different uniforms, sort of a more gentler, more, I don't know, just a different version. And I think it was Baltimore County was talking a lot about their program and how it had been actually, you know, the SROs had been cut and then they came back in with the sort of youth services type thing. And then that actually is now getting expanded because of all the gun violence in and around their schools. So it was just a really interesting topic, and it's one that's happening obviously at the national level. And I wanted to throw that out there because I don't know what we'll do here, but yeah.
If I could throw in a final comment as well on this topic, it's hard often to compare because, you know, every jurisdiction, when we're talking about law enforcement, right, every jurisdiction is so different from every other one. One of the areas that I'm doing some interviews right now is in northern LA County, where the sheriff's department provides SROs, and I was shocked to learn that they don't receive any special training about working in the schools. It's just part of the rotation that they will go through. And there was an ugly incident that happened earlier this year as a result. By contrast, there are other jurisdictions. I understand EPD is one where the officers who, like Navaisha, who are doing that work, are ones who want to do that work. They receive special training. That's not the case in LA County, where the officers doing are not choosing it. They're sort of assigned to it, probably because they didn't get their first or second choice. So a lot does depend on how it's done, and I just want to sort of put that out there because it's easy to make generalizations, and the research is pretty unequivocal that increased police contact for juveniles is not a good thing. And so to the extent that we can divert them toward other kinds of contact, that's great. But when that contact does happen, how it happens is incredibly important. And so I just wanted to say that.
Michael, quick question. When we talk about juveniles and police contact, does it distinguish between police contact in a school setting versus just police contact out on the street being picked up?
It doesn't matter. I mean, yeah. If young people are finding themselves in contact with the police, that they're already at a point, right, where that's probably they're on that's not going to impact them positively, unfortunately, on average, right, in the aggregate. That said, as I said, how it happens is incredibly important. So it's entirely possible, and there are many examples of young people having contact with law enforcement and it actually being a very good experience for them that puts them in a different direction than they would have been otherwise. I don't want to discount that that's the case.
Well,
it's not the standard, though.
I guess what my question kind of is how would they even be tracking that Ryan's an officer in the school and he's talking with kids in the hallway and goes on and talks to other kids in the hallway? I mean, that's not even really, I mean, it's a contact, obviously, but it's not something that would be trackable, I would guess. So I mean, it's just kind of one of those things. It's like, I think there are a lot of interactions that come into play that we never then see the kid again, or may never see the kid again because they had this first contact and he's like, oh, Ryan's in the hallway. I better not be doing this out behind South Eugene, and then doesn't get caught and grows out of that phase, as we know many kids do, right?
Well,
so, anyway.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I think something else that I wanted to just highlight was Clay's comment about how is this being measured, right? Like, how is the success or failure of this being measured? And I think that goes to both of your points, Bernadette and Michael, because our program seems to be a little different, right? And our schools are different, our problems are different, like all of these things. And so really getting into that nitty gritty of, okay, we made a really big policy decision or a program change. How do we measure whether that's good or bad? And I don't know. I would love to find out.
I would ask people at the in the policy, was it PPM over at U of O, who have lots of experience measuring the success of policy implementation. But I would just say, Bernadette, there are many ways that this might be measured, right? So you could do a qualitative study of people who are like ex-offenders, like as adults, and sort of see when they first came in contact and like what trajectory that sent them on. You could do a very small qualitative study of just one high school cohort and sort of track them for 4 years and see what kinds of contact they have by self-reporting and ask them how they felt. So there's different ways you could do it. You can't always generalize one direction, right? So you can get the really big studies, which is what I'm talking about. They don't generalize to the low level, which is what I mean by a lot depends on how things happen, right? So there's ways to do it, but none of it is going to tell us about our program unless someone does a study of our program.
I guess it kind of brings me back when we were on the police commission and they were talking about the taser policy. And, if you talk to officers, Springfield department, it's like the number of taser uses, far outweighs the number of taser uses in Eugene. And so, it's like, is it the taser use? Is it the displaying the taser? Is it just touching your hand on the taser? Which of those things changes the behavior in the incident? And so I think sometimes it's like, I'm not sure that the studies can get all of those things because you don't know when a person sees the taser, it's enough to like change their mind. There's just some things that we won't ever know. I mean, and I think the same is when I worked in juvenile justice, it was like there was lots in juvenile justice that you couldn't measure. So thanks for being here, Ryan. It's always appreciate your perspective.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I really appreciate all of the questions and everything. I'm looking at the time. We're about 10 minutes over, but we do have some like wiggle room at the end because we can go to 8 and we're only scheduled till 7:40. So I don't want to cut it off if like there's anything else that hasn't been asked or said. Clay, or was that a?
Yeah. Well, I will just make a plug for tracking information. So and this is a totally different agency, but when I was working at the Portland Police Bureau, we had to have so many conversations about what our desired outcomes were and what we were trying to understand about the police bureau's impact because of the oversight that we had from the Department of Justice, that we kind of altered a lot of the ways that we were looking at the data that we were capable of tracking, and then thought about new ways of actually getting data. So if this is not necessarily a thing that the police bureau would be doing, that the EPD would be doing, but it might be a school district question, for this particular issue. But as we're going through all the issues that we discuss as a board, and since we have the year of EPD at some points, just recommending that if there's something that we're curious about outcomes for, because that's kind of what we're here for, making sure that we're taking a hard look at the data that we can collect and how we collect it, and then how we analyze it too. Because it does tell a lot of stories, as Michael was saying. You can really have a lot of insight from data, even though it's not a perfect thing. You also have experiences outside of things that can be tracked, of course. So I don't have a solution for this particular issue, but I do think it's an important aspect of the work.
I wonder, is there a next step that would be appropriate, Ryan or Leah or Rob or Lindsay? Like if somebody wanted to look into that, who would that person be to talk to, or what would be the?
Yeah, I mean, if I had an idea as to exactly what you were looking for, I mean, kind of what you wanted to see, what I could do is talk to our crime analysis supervisor. They're pretty amazing about mining data. It's just a matter of knowing what it is we're looking for and then figuring out how to pull that up. But I mean, we keep record, obviously the police department, we have records of everything that we do for the most part. So it's just a matter of what parameters are you going to use and how we're going to look at it. So if I had a general idea of what you were looking for, I certainly could, or specific, I should say, not general, specifically what you're looking for. I certainly would be willing to talk to Ryan and see if that's something we could look at. Because I know, before when they're talking about not renewing the contract, we did a lot of data dumps just to show our contacts and how we responded and what most of our responses were, how many arrests were made, and people of color, Caucasian. I mean, all of that was broken down, completely, so that we could show those numbers. And so I know that there is a lot of that out there. It's just a matter of collecting it and getting it into a usable format.
I think Carolyn, I think we can meet as a team and see if we can come up with the right questions to ask, and maybe reach out to, it sounds like Clay and Michael have some good ideas too, so we could keep Michael sucked in for a bit longer. But yeah, we can sort of try to brainstorm and report back on what we can figure out.
Cool. All right. Well, then I think we can take a break. Should we stick to the 10 minutes that we have scheduled, or should we lower it to 5?
Up to you guys.
Hold up your hand. 5. I see some 5s. Oh, I see a 10. How about 7.5?
Great.
Okay, let's meet back here at 6:42 and 30 seconds. Thank you, Ryan.
You're welcome.
Dealing with a very disobedient dog.
All right. Case review. We have one case tonight. Who is doing our?
I think that would be me.
Yay.
Can you all hear me okay? All right, I'll get back to the first slide. There we go. Okay, so you're reviewing one case today. as Carolyn said. So this is related to allegations that officers violated the arrest policy by failing to transport a suspect to a proper facility as soon as possible and mistreated the suspect by leaving them in handcuffs for an extended period of time. So the summary of facts, I'll start just by pointing out that this was an internally generated complaint made by witnessing officers. And I think that's an important detail to notice, that other officers reported the behavior. So officers A and B arrested the suspect for violating a park restriction. During the arrest process, they placed the suspect in handcuffs, inventoried the backpack for lodging at the jail, where they discovered drugs in the backpack and packaging materials. They also found a small locked container in the backpack that the suspect denied them permission to search. So they drove to the evidence control unit where we toured last month and left the suspect handcuffed in the back of the vehicle for over an hour while they inventoried and documented the contents of the backpack. Though they did from time to time go and check on the suspect, and after, I believe it was about an hour and 20 minutes, moved the handcuffs from behind the suspect to in front for the suspect's comfort. They didn't actively monitor the suspect and denied him access to a restroom when he had requested it. So the suspect was in handcuffs in the back of the vehicle for over an hour and a half. Officers A and B eventually requested for another officer to transport the suspect to jail, which is what happened. So the allegations were two subsections of the arrests policy. So that officers A and B violated the arrest policy by failing to transport the suspect to a proper facility as soon as possible. And then the other subsection C, that officers A and B mistreated the suspect by leaving him in the patrol car in handcuffs for an extended period of time. In terms of adjudication recommendations, this is the easiest matrix that we filled out for several months. It's the auditor recommended for both officers, for both allegations, that it be sustained, as did the chain of command and the chief. So the issues for CRB discussion, as usual, there's the complaint intake, classification, and monitoring. There's the policies, both subsections of the arrest policy, and then the adjudication recommendations. The materials that we provided for you, there's body-worn video, there's the report detailing the investigative process, correspondence related to the complaint, the adjudication recommendation memo from the chain of command, from the auditor, from the chief, and the related police reports and dispatch records, along with the EPD policies. And that is it. If you have any questions for me that I can clarify before your discussion, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, I will stop sharing and Carolyn, let you facilitate the rest of the discussion.
All right, we'll continue with our order. And Michael, you started our comments, so we'll move to Alan to start this one. And we're going to talk about complaint intake, classification, investigation, and monitoring. And I can put the order back in here just in case.
Thank you, Lindsay. Appreciate that. A very thorough report on a thorough investigation that I don't have a ton to say. I thought that it, of course, is remarkable that it not remarkable in the sense that it shouldn't happen, but noteworthy that it was officer generated. That means it works. It was taken seriously, and all the way through. So the intake and classification, my 2 points about the investigation. The one is that the officers in the break room, one of them said, and he was interviewed, I think Ryan interviewed him. One of them said the Henry units were up to some shady stuff in the parks, today or something. And we saw information in the materials that we were provided that there were like that was when there were 250 camps in the in the park, and it was that intense time, I think. And they had these units apparently that were park specific, but I didn't think he was questioned about that, or they were questioned, excuse me, they were questioned, the officer that made that comment. And they said in their interview, I think they knew that the question was the custody in the parking lot, and the length of time, and the risk of having that person there, and having someone else take them to the jail. And so that officer, they responded to the why, what did you mean that the Henrys were up to the shady stuff? And they answered, oh, it was basically, as I recall it, they answered something like it was just the car, and said that what you're investigating. And it struck me as not sincere, and in need of some kind of follow-up, that if they were upset enough that they complained, that the two officers, the complaining officers, were upset enough about what they saw that they complained, and this other officer, they're saying that was some shady stuff. It just seems like maybe it's not the whole story. But as to the story of the hour and a half in custody and the not going to the bathroom, I think the department, the auditor, the officers who complained, system worked. So that's what I got. Oh, and the body cam, the muting. I don't know where in our matrix it fits in to keep bringing this up, but once again, we have selective muting of the mics, and that is again remains troublesome. So thank you.
Bernadette, you're up.
Sorry, I was trying to find the list to figure out when I was. Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a lot to say here other than I appreciate that the officer that brought this to everyone's attention was someone with, I think, about 3 to 5 years experience, if I remember. And the officers that, they were bringing this issue up on were certainly more experienced. I think I saw like 15 years experience. So, I mean, I appreciate that means that the ones that are coming up are recognizing that it's okay to watch what's going on, to learn from, who's doing things, and to question whether or not how things are being done are the right ways to be doing things. Because, were they bringing this up strictly as a complaint process or also for a self-education? I mean, it might have been a little bit of both. And I'm not sure that it really matters. I mean, I think just the fact that we got to know it, which kind of made me wonder, and there's probably not statistics on this, although your guys are really good with statistics, Ryan. The time from arrest to the time of arrival at the jail, I guess that can't really be tracked because sometimes they have to go to the hospitals and things like that. I think I think any of us probably know, I think everyone on this board probably knows where the location was of this arrest, where the jail was in relationship to this arrest, and that the jail was much closer than the property control room, as evidenced by how far the car had to keep driving to get there. And so, I mean, I'm not, maybe it's just overkill to say how long it actually, the mileage, because it would have been, what, a half a mile to get to the jail and a couple of miles to get out property control. And I think the only other thing was, like, which was really interesting, when they were being interviewed, one of the officers said, "We split these things up to be as efficient as possible." And I thought, well, now if you're being efficient as possible, wouldn't you just go over to the jail and drop this person off, drive that half mile, drop them off, and then go do all of these other things? And yes, I'm sure as an officer, it's extremely frustrating that you're going to go and you're going to keep working on a case by lodging all this stuff into property, and their person that you've lodged into jail is already out on the streets, wondering where their stuff is. I'm sure that's frustrating, but I just think about how long it took my mom to make Thanksgiving dinner every year and how it was done in like about 15 minutes. And I kind of go, okay, sometimes things take a really long time. And it doesn't seem in the balance to, have the other side of it. I know that's kind of a flip example, but it was the only one I could come up with on shorthand. But I think the intake classification, I think everything was good, and I wasn't sure where else to put those comments. So I put them here.
I'm next. I think that it was all, the intake and classification were great. I always love to see when it's internal. I really appreciate that. And I think it says a lot for, especially Bernadette, I'm glad you pointed out the time of service that they've been in, that says a lot about our younger generation, or not necessarily age, but you know what I mean. Baby cops doing, standing up for what's right. And that's the direction it should go. So I appreciate that. And with the investigation and monitoring, it was complete, it was thorough, it was, I always appreciate that. Ryan, you do a good job of that. I do have a question. It's kind of an aside. It seems like the auditor representative, I think it's always been Leah in the cases we've seen, they're remote. Is that just the new practice, or is that you're going into the office sometimes, but we just don't see those?
Yeah, I've been mixing it up a little bit, and I think at the time we were doing this, I was still mostly covering all of the interviews, and so if I was traveling, for instance, I would do it remotely. But yeah, I would say we're trying to be there in person as much as we can, and we're lucky that everyone is being as flexible as they have been.
And then in terms of the other thing you were bringing up, Bernadette, the idea of like the distance and everything, that definitely struck me. And I think we'll come into this a little bit later, where Officer A, I think they're a little bit out of order in the naming and in some things, but I think A had some good introspection about, knowing what I know now. I probably would have brought him to HQ and he could sit down there. I think that's, so that it sounds to me, correct me if I'm wrong, Ryan, there is a place at police headquarters on Country Club where people can be held before they're booked into jail. Is that accurate? So that would kind of prolong that situation of if they're booked into jail, then they're going to be released, right? That's what they were assuming. But you could put them in police HQ and then they would sit while you're logging the information. And then after that, you take them to jail and book them, and then they can be released. But at least everything had been done. Is that my understanding? And how common is that to put somebody who's been arrested into the HQ cell rather than, or what is it, holding cell at police headquarters, as opposed to taking them to jail? And is there a route, like, why would you do that? Why would you choose that? There's a lot of questions. Is Ryan even here? I don't know. Cindy, anybody? Clay? I'm just kidding. I'm done. Do you have an answer? Ryan?
Oh my
There
gosh,
he
I
is.
so apologize. I had a 17-year-old who had an emergency that had to tell me a story right then and there. So I apologize. I did not hear what you said, Carolyn.
Okay, I'll do it again.
So sorry.
That's okay. Officer A talked about how if they could do it over again, they would probably take them to police headquarters and put them in a holding cell, as opposed to what they did, or the other option of taking them directly to jail, which was, like, as Bernadette said, a half mile away. I guess headquarters is about a half mile away too, just a different direction. But why and how often would a police officer choose to take somebody to that holding cell in the police headquarters, as opposed to obviously what they did, which we've decided it was not right, or take them to jail?
Yes. Okay. So the holding cells are not used that often. Typically our holding cells are used for, like, detectives will put out attempt to locate on folks that they're investigating, that they may have probable cause to arrest them. And so, like, patrol officer will, in the evening time, they'll make a traffic stop or a person stop or whatever. They'll find out this person has a probable cause attempt to locate out on them, and the detective will get called from home. They're like, hey, take him to the holding cell, and I gotta, get dressed and do my thing or whatever and come in. So that's usually how our holding cells are used. uh, or extensive interviews or something, say we've got a major crime and we need to interview a couple different folks, we may put them in the holding cell for something like that. So it's not that common. I mean, I could see it could potentially be used for something like this, but it's certainly not a normal practice.
It seems like you probably don't have a whole lot of these, and it wouldn't be a good practice to start making this is like the standard practice when we arrest someone, we take them here first.
Yeah, we've only got a couple holding cells. I think maybe 2 or 3, maybe 3 down there. I don't know. It's been so long since I've been down there. Fortunately, my investigations don't take me down there. But yeah, there aren't that many of them, and again, it's just not that common. I mean, usually folks will take somebody to jail and deal with the property and all that other stuff afterwards.
Okay. I'm realizing that I'm totally jumping the gun, and that was really should have been in the next section. So I'm gonna just be done, and Jose, you can keep going.
Well, I apologize for not hearing you the first time, so sorry about that.
It's okay. I think I was much more succinct the second time anyway.
Well, how dare you have a family, Ryan?
I know.
Saying
Sorry
that
about that.
Yeah, saying that as someone with 2 kids running around right now. Okay. I had a question in this section, which I think falls into the realm of intake, classification, investigation. I found the investigation to be very thorough, and I always appreciate the work that you do, Ryan, and Leah, and the auditor's office. I don't know if this is relevant, but I feel like I'm curious anyway. What protection do the officers reporting misconduct have from retaliation? Is this anonymous? How does that process work?
So outside of a respectful work environment type case, the officer has the right through negotiations to have a copy of the investigation non-redacted, so that they're able to review everything once it's complete. So it's all done and all finished, then they get a copy of that investigation. If it's a respectful work environment and it doesn't include any allegations of misconduct, then typically that gets done through HR, and their policy is not to release any of that because they do have concerns about potential retaliation or pieces like that. Obviously, we've got in our city APM, we've got the respectful work environment policy, and that talks about retaliation, and there's certainly, if anything like that were to happen, that would be dealt with swiftly, and there's policies in place to be able to deal with something like that.
There is also a retaliation section in the EPD specific personnel complaints policy.
Perfect.
But yeah, it doesn't stay anonymous, which is a thing to think about.
Thank you. In terms of workplace culture, is this something that the department addresses or feels like it needs to address actively? Like, I mean, my workplace is not necessarily where this is something that I'm a professor. We're not necessarily dealing with allegations of misconduct of this type that could be, directly affecting how I have to relate to my colleagues for the next 10, 15, 20 years. Is this something that the department actively addresses or feels like it needs to address?
I mean, actively addresses, I don't know that that's the case. I mean, there's expectations. I think there's some difference in culture too. I mean, everybody knows when you're in law enforcement, you've got this code of ethics you have to follow. You've got these ethical principles that you have to follow. I mean, and that's really ingrained since like day one. So certainly, people could have some bad feelings about somebody who told on them when they did something wrong, but I think that the culture itself is just it's expected, like you will do that. And so I don't know that that's really that necessary from a standpoint. And it doesn't happen that often that we have issues between employees. No, let me clarify that. It happens that other employees will bring up inappropriate behavior, but it's very rare that we've had. I can only think of one time in the 6 years I've been doing this, where we had an employee feel like another employee was having some bad feelings about it because they had reported them, and it was one case that we had, and it was several years ago. So I don't see that coming up very often. I think if it did, then we could address it, but everybody's pretty good about standing up for themselves and talking about stuff and bringing things forward if they need to. I just don't feel like it's a major issue.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for fielding that question. I mean, the context for that is that, like, I don't know, I believe that there are good forms of bureaucracy, or necessary forms of bureaucracy, and unnecessary forms of bureaucracy. And it's just such a tricky thing. Humans are weird, and it's wildly unpredictable. And when it comes to, like, I think I would prefer to frame this as like somebody did what they were supposed. A set of officers did what they were called to do in the good of serving the public good. I can see how some in some cases there's like fears of maybe framing it as narking or something like that. But yeah, I just like to think about in terms of, I think about my role here as like thinking about how we communicate what the role of policing is and what it does and what it can do. And I think communicating stuff like this can be important. So that's the context for my questions. The other one that I have, and sorry to take up so much time because I want that information to be able to address my comment in the next section is I don't know how to contextualize one important fact about this case, which is the length of time the custody was in cuffs and in the police car. I see that one of those numbers is 1 hour and 33 minutes. Does EPD have data about, say, the average time a custody is in cuffs or an average time a custody is in transport?
So again, I'm certain we could pull that data, because typically an officer will say, code 4-1 in custody, and then they'll say, en route to the jail or out at the jail, that kind of a thing. So that it's I believe that's available. I'm not the data guy though by any means, as I think I already explained to Clay. But it varies quite often, and so here's where I see people get into, just as kind of an example. Okay, so here's where people see people stay into custody for longer periods of times. If it's a major scene and we need to talk to that person while we're processing that scene, so we still have them in the back of the car, and we need to have some conversations with them to be able to get more information, to know what it is we need to gather evidence wise or statement wise and things like that. Those will tend to stay in a vehicle in handcuffs a little longer. Sometimes when we take them to the jail refuses them, then we have to take them to the hospital to get a release from the hospital. They will typically stay in handcuffs longer, but once they're at the hospital, then they usually get handcuffed to the bed rail, so they're not back behind their back any longer. I would say, based off my experience, I don't. It's uncommon for somebody to be in handcuffs behind their back for over an hour, or even an hour for that matter, or even up to an hour for that matter.
Okay. Yeah, I tend to, when I read the report, I wanted to keep my moral outrage in check. Again, to contextualize these facts within, if this is kind of falls within a bell curve range of, like, time in cuffs or time in custody. Yeah, just as a non-specialist, that's helpful. So thank you, Ryan. I'm done now. Sorry.
I would just say, just to add to that, I would say on average, usually we make our contact, we develop a probable cause, we make an arrest, we do a couple of little things here and there, and then typically transport somebody to jail. Or if the primary officer has to stick around to do more stuff or more interviews, then somebody else on scene will transport that person to the jail. So it's typically, it's typically that kind of speed. So
Yeah.
If that helps.
Thank you. Yeah, totally.
I have just a couple things to add. One is we definitely get a lot of complaints from folks who say I was in handcuffs and they hurt, and they're uncomfortable. I don't have a lot of experience with that, thank God. But anyway, we just, a lot of people are complaining about that when they're in the handcuffs, and there's different things that officers can do. They can use 2 sets to make it a little so your hands are further apart. And And in this case, I think they ended up putting them in the front because that's also slightly less uncomfortable, but it's, yeah, it's not good. It's not good to be just sitting in them for so long. We definitely had folks who complain about nerve damage and things like that if they've stayed in them for a really long time. And then the other thing, just to your previous point about reporting, was I think the other factor that I see, and obviously Ryan can speak to this better than me, but it's because there is the duty to report. I think that facilitates some more understanding of, like, you know, the reporting officers didn't want to get in trouble by not saying anything. So they said something. And I think that that can help folks who ultimately become Officer A to be like, well, you know, like, I can see why they wouldn't want to go through this process. So.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, it's similar to like when I compel somebody to speak, like you have to, I'm giving you guarantee and you have to talk to me. And a lot of the new legislation changed a lot of our policies to add that language in there that you are required to report, which makes it, that much easier for somebody not to have this dilemma about, I don't want to, I should, but I don't want to, that kind of thing. It's like, I have to, I don't have a choice.
All right, I think that's my cue, Jose. I don't have much to add, except to say that I was maybe on the other end of the spectrum from Jose, where I've mostly worked with officers who work on behavioral health issues, and knowing that that can take so long to find an end point. An hour and a half didn't seem like crazy to me. So it's actually good to hear that that is way beyond what you would normally do. And, beyond the reasonableness basically for that policy. So I was glad to see this case come through and sort of see it internally generated, and to see the level of commitment to justice for people we are, police are arresting. So yeah, that's all.
I'm up next. Sorry to make you keep talking so much, Sergeant Nelson, but I wanted to ask a quick question. Just sort of, I pulled up the org chart because I was looking at the officer snapshots and or the little bits of information we get, and noticing that the reporting officers were in patrol, and the two officers with the allegations against them were in operations support. So I had to look up the chart to see you have 6 divisions and how they're laid out. And so the parks goes under the operations support. So my question is just like, do you like, what's your sense of how separate those 2 divisions are, right? I mean, people are always moving back and forth. Is there a sense that you would expect more likely the report to come from officers who are assigned to a different division, or does all of that just completely immaterial?
Yeah, really immaterial. I mean, I got to be honest with you. If you asked majority of our patrol officers what division the parks folks go through or are assigned to, they probably would say patrol. It isn't something that they look at really. I mean, it's just, they look at them as other officers. They have a special assignment. So I think that's more or less how they look at it is their special assignment for parks, but they don't recognize that they're actually even in a different division within the organization.
Gotcha. Yeah, the reason I looked it up was I assumed the parks would be in patrol, and then I thought, well, it's not, and why not? So thank you. One quick thing I wanted to point out that I just don't understand at all. On page 2 of the PDF version of what we have, there's a sort of snapshot under officer witnesses, snapshot officer information at the time of incident, body worn camera, Latino. And in my head, like, all 3 of those phrases make sense, but I don't understand how they're juxtaposed. It's a little word salad-ish. I don't know if that was like a software glitch or the printout.
I gotta look at that, Michael.
It just struck me as like, I didn't know body worn cameras had ethnicity.
I'm not sure what that even is, Leah. Was that generated through us or through you guys, or?
I think that's gotta be I'm looking at it. I'm
Okay,
looking at it.
okay.
Jeez.
Yeah, I have no clue.
I don't know.
All right, I just thought I'd point that out. I don't know if that's probably some glitch in the software generating information for the printout. The final thing I'll just say on this stuff is that, you know, when I started reading this, I had a moment where I was like, "Is Jason back?" And I was like, "Oh no, this is Sergeant Nelson. This is it was just really well written report and well done. Thank you."
Thanks, I appreciate that.
Michael, I read that too, and I just figured it was the robots starting to take over the world, and they were asserting their personal identifications. So, Leah, looks like you found it. Bernadette, could you please start us talking about EPD policies, practices, and training?
Sure. So, yeah, I appreciated the policies that were set forth here and the ones that we went for. I assume that we didn't go for the body worn camera thing because the judge, I mean, we've never really done any allegations on body worn cameras. And I don't know, that's like, would that fall under judgment, or is that just kind of, or is
So
that one of those catch-alls that we just kind of go, we don't need to pile it on sort of thing, or?
we do it when it's egregious, and I anticipate you're going to be seeing more of those when the policy changes. We have been waiting for the policy to change for a little while, but the changes are being bargained and negotiated and all of that. But I think as we eliminate the possible reasons for muting down to just a few, that we'll probably see, well, actually, here's the thing. Hopefully we won't see more body worn camera violations, but I think I will be more likely to open those types of complaints. I would say it's hard for it's, yeah. So sorry, I'm gonna just talk forever, so I'm gonna stop now.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. I hope that was helpful. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that we're not charging, we're not going to look at the allegations with regards to body worn cameras at this time. We're going to wait for the policy to change. But if there's something that makes more sense, in this case, keeping them in handcuffs, the arrest policy made more sense than to go down the path of judgment or body worn camera. Right?
Yeah, I think, I mean, we've had them, so we've definitely had body worn violations come, even in one memorable instance that I remember, be the only allegation that we looked at when it got muted for a very important conversation that we needed to know about. And there was no good reason for it. So it's something that, I mean, we definitely see, we talk about a lot. There's often a sort of perfunctory muting for tactics, and then we don't know what they talk about. So it's tough to sort of have that clear line of, this is when I'm going to do an allegation and this is when I'm not right now. And I'm hoping that as the policy gets clarified, that that's going to help me too.
Okay, thanks.
I kind of already talked about all of my policies and training and everything before, so I'm going to pass it on to Jose.
I just really wish we would see a blanket prohibition on muting of any kind, and let the people in records do the muting and redacting for us, because they have they have less of an interest in any of those situations. And I will just say this for as long as I'm on the board, that I think that across the board, prohibition of muting as a policy is a good thing to consider.
Yeah, the only thing I have to add is to echo Jose's recommendation.
So rather than echo that recommendation, I will just state that in the police commission meeting a couple back, the chief did say that he supported, he would like to see the cameras always on and never muted. I also mentioned Jose's suggestion that there can be redactions done after the fact when footage needs to be released. So all of that is out there, but as Leah noted, this is partly a subject of bargaining. So I think that it's on the way, or sorry, negotiation.
Yeah. And I will say that the ethnicity of the body worn camera, I see that now in the report. I don't know where that came from, but I did just run the report again in the database, and it no longer shows up as the body worn camera having an ethnicity. So somehow that got fixed. Thank you for pointing it out.
Can I ask Michael, can you clarify why the policy needs to be negotiated? Or maybe
Yeah,
that's a question for Ryan. I've never
That's a
heard
question
of.
for the chief or for Ryan.
It's
So I
a
don't have-
substantial change in working condition.
Yeah, I don't have all the details on it, but there is a
Oh.
draft policy that's written now, and there's chief is in talks with the union about it. So because it is a significant change.
So, it's a significant change in working conditions.
Yeah,
That's what the phrase is. I mean,
Yeah.
because not all policies get negotiated by the union.
that's
right?
true. Yeah. So if it changes their working conditions, then it's something that they need to check in and bargain for.
Okay, because I don't remember the taser policy being held up with regards to union negotiations.
No, and I'd need to look in through that, but I think that had to do with, it was implementing a new tool. And to the extent that we had tasers prior to that long policy process, it was part of a pilot program. So it's just covered under different, it's all just labor law requirements for.
Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to digress and go off, but I just
Okay.
had never heard that idea before. So thank you.
Okay, and I should have brought up the muting probably in this metric, not in the first one, but all I was doing really is kind of echoing I wasn't suggesting that I expected the auditor to act on that. In this case, I'm just simply saying, as we as a group have been kind of reinforcing the notion that we're not pleased. I don't want to speak for others, but certain members of this group have made it pretty clear that the selective muting is troubling to us. And so what Jose is advocating for is just, what I would advocate for as well. So thank you.
Okay, now adjudication recommendations, and we switched how we do this last month. And what I recall is we take a time to go around and talk about it, but then at the end we do a more concrete kind of show of hands of agreement. So I don't have much to say. I think when everybody agrees, it's easier to kind of go through this. So I'm going to say that I agree with everything, but I also want to hear comments before I make my final designation. Jose, it's your turn.
Oh, sorry. I'm off in La La Land for a minute. I'd like to say that I'm pleased that there was consensus in terms of the adjudication recommendations. I like that because I like it when there's consensus and that we can communicate that we're all on the same page about what we expect from policing and what our standards are. And I think consistent messaging, it doesn't always have to be like that, and it can't be expected to be like that in every case. But I think that I don't know, just pleased to see that happening. Pleased to see that the investigation, the work of the folks doing the investigating speaks for itself.
I also agree with the consensus of the adjudications. That's it.
Oh, I forgot. Yep.
I'm going to say, I think it would be wrong to go through this case and not say that, part of the reason I think there was this consensus is that the two officers that were were the subject of the investigation, it seems like they were punishing the guy for not providing the lock, not providing the combination to open the, and so there's an expression that, you know, I've been a public defender, a prosecutor, and a judge, but the expression remains the same. It's like you can beat the rap, but you can't beat the ride. And this was a ride, and this ride resulted in an hour and a half with hands behind the back, and that it just was wrong. And so I really appreciate that, you know, even if by some objective standard, it's not a tremendous amount of time or it doesn't cause nerd, you know, that's irrelevant. It was a punishment. It was, you know, you don't get, you know, and perhaps also a tactic of delaying the quick release. I hadn't really considered that. I just thought the guy, they were being punished for not cooperating. So I think I appreciate the efforts of all involved and agree with the result. Thank you.
I'm going to disagree somewhat with what Alan said. I don't see this as the officers were holding him, the subject, in the back of the car as a punishment. I think they thought it was going to be pretty quick to get there. It's not until they open the backpack and they start finding all these things and finding something locked and, you know, the multitude of things that were going on. And the reason I come to that conclusion is because their contact at the park with lots of people around, all of those tents around there, all the people that were in all those tents, it was very cordial. It was very calm. It was very, very much the de-escalation tone that I think we want our officers to have in many of the other cases we've seen. And I thought, I mean, even the way the officer eventually put the gentleman in handcuffs was what, I mean, it was just, I thought it was like textbook. I mean, it's like, as I'm watching these videos, because I hadn't read anything first, I'm just watching the videos and I'm like, I'm not sure what we're watching here as to what the complaint is. Obviously I figured out what the complaint was, but I took the officer's comment that they felt no ill will towards this person as genuine. I think it was just, I think they just got doing what they were doing. And as many of us do, you know, lose track of time, call me naive, but I thought that was just my feeling. But I agree with the adjudication. And I think even the officers that were the subject of this in some ways agree with the adjudication in the sense that they wouldn't have done it this way next time. So I appreciate that they got to that point. That's all.
Okay, I think typically we'd go around and go adjudication by adjudication, or allegation by allegation and adjudication, and say if we agree, but it seems like everybody agreed with everything. Could you raise your hand if you agree with the consensus that was brought? Thumbs up or raise hand. Okay, so that should be noted in the minutes that all of us unanimously agreed with all of the agreement that has already been agreed upon with the agreeable parties. Leah, it's your turn.
I just loved hearing the word agree so much.
I was trying to figure out another way to do it, but I just couldn't. So
I know, I loved it. And I just want to say I appreciate your comment, Jose, about seeing one where we all agreed, because literally we had another one like this week where we disagreed, and I was like, oh, put that on the list. We're gonna have to take that to CRB, because I almost always take them to you when we disagree, and they don't happen all that often, but when they do, I really do like hearing your opinions, you know, especially when you back me up. Just kidding. So sorry. It's been a long, I was going to say long week, but it's Tuesday. So I did an auditor's report already. That's where we are, right? No, where are we, Carolyn? Okay, thank you. So that covers most of the bases. There are a couple things I just wanted to highlight for you. So one is we are looking at moving our office space. We have outgrown our current space. Lindsay is working in our conference room. It's just not right. So we're looking around. And one of the things that we're looking at in our potential spaces is having a CRB meeting area. That would be our own, so we don't have to jockey with other city boards and commissions, and hopefully can get that set up for hybrid meetings and and all of that. So if you have questions about that, please feel free to let me know. We did a couple of weeks ago, we got to walk around and do like a tour of spaces. It was like house hunters. It was like the most fun day we've had in the office in a really long time. So and then I spoke a little bit about PERF, the conference I went to a couple of weeks ago. It was really interesting. It was really interesting to hear so many folks start to try to process the last 2 years. And I, of course, noted, personally, I hadn't really had a chance to do that yet. So there's a lot to go through. It's been obviously really, really tough, but it was really good to come together, and it was good to hear so many folks have consensus and agreement around something, even the things that need to be done about gun violence in this country. And as hard of a problem as that is, and as sticky as it is, that everyone was feeling the same way was really interesting and helpful to me. And if you have any other questions about that, I'm happy to answer those as well. We are working on annual reports. Lindsay and Rob and Beatrice have been amazing in pulling all of this together. And so Carolyn and Bernadette, I'll be sending the CRB annual report to you guys probably tonight for your review, and hopefully we can get that pushed out to the group by the end of the week. The auditor's annual report, I need to do just some finishing touches on it because you guys, our office team is amazing. It's so nice. It's just really, really nice to not be doing it like I did last year. So I'll be getting those out to you as well, and out to council. We're reporting on those at council on the 27th of June. So again, Carolyn and Bernadette, I'll be checking in with you about who wants to come with me to that little party. And that'll be the Monday night work session. And then speaking of council, a couple of you have asked, they're going to be in their work session tomorrow. They're going to be looking at how to permanently fill the auditor's position. So they're working with HR on that, and I'm not going, I'm not a part of that, but if you're interested, that's when they are talking about that. I think those were all the highlights I had. Lindsay, the other thing I had is, I wrote this in the report, but one of the places I went to go talk about our work in our office was the Citizens Police Academy at EPD. That's one of the things that I did when I first started so many years ago. And I know Bernadette's done it. It's an interesting experience. So anyway, Rob's doing the Citizens Police Academy this year. They brought it back this year. If any of you have questions about that, you didn't get to hear from Rob a lot tonight. So if you have questions, you can ask him. But I think that's all I have. Did anything arise in the last few months that you wanted to check in with me about, or? Oh, Jose.
Sorry, would you mention one more time where where and who is considering how to fill the police auditor's position?
Yeah. So it's city council. So I report directly to city council, and so they get to decide whether to keep me or not. And I looked through the materials for tomorrow, and so they're working with HR, and they're gonna, they know that they can either do a direct appointment or they could do a national search, and there's kind of a lot of options in between. And I don't know what choice they will choose.
If we cannot make city council and do our civic duty because we have other civic duties to
Sure.
do, who would you recommend I email or talk with if I wanted to throw my 2 cents into the community well?
It's a very good question. I don't even actually know if they're going to have public comment at this work session, so I wouldn't worry about the timing. I would email council and the mayor.
Cool. Thank you.
I hope that's not wrong. We'll find out.
Is there a general email that goes out to all council members, or do we have to email them specifically? Lindsay's nodding. Lindsay will send it to us.
Yeah, we'll send you the link.
That conflict from
It's
you.
a little package. It goes out to them all.
And the city manager too, I think. So
Yeah, kind of like if you email the police auditor, it comes to all of us. It's the same setup.
Would you send that email address to me at least, please? I won't speak for everybody else.
I'll try to hunt it down right now and just put it in the chat. Is that functional for people, or would you prefer me to send it out to your emails?
Chat's fine for me.
Same.
You guys are very sweet. Thank you. I mean, I'm assuming you're being sweet, so we'll just go with that. And yeah, I think that's it. Carolyn was going to maybe check in with you. We are scheduled for a July meeting. I won't be here. I have a extended family trip that was planned for last year that I'm going on now. So I won't be here, but Rob and Lindsay will be, and Beatrice and Vicky. And then we usually have a break in August. So if you all want to talk about that, that's fine. But if you have questions for me, I'm happy to answer questions. Otherwise, Carolyn, I can shoot it back to you and we can move forward.
I think the last thing that we have to do is honor Bill, who's not here,
Bill.
and Michael, and thank them for their diligent participation in this board. Michael, you've been on the board for 3 years. And it's been great having you and hearing your thoughts and ideas. And I hope that you have success in your next endeavors. And I can't wait to read your book.
3 tumultuous years. It's quite a time to jump into police oversight, Michael. No, I very much appreciate your service. Bill's as well, if Bill is ever going to watch this. But it's been really, really fun getting to know you and learn more about your work and talk to you more about your work. And I'm fascinated by it. So maybe we can have you back as a training session when you're off doing things in Texas. But yeah, it's been really lovely, and thank you for all of your time and your service. I know that the police commission does like the fancy coins and certificates and stuff. We aren't always good about that. We're civilians. I'm sorry.
We would have had like a special dinner if we had been in person.
Yes, there you go.
I will count I'm getting a challenge because of my 6 months on the police commission. I'm getting a challenge coin from them. So I'll just know that is from both.
There you go.
Ours would have been better though if we'd done it.
Yeah, we'll work on that. One of my long-term projects.
Do one of those like googly eyes because you're overseeing.
I love that.
It's really, or a monocle.
I'm making notes now, Michael.
All right. I and Lindsay put the email in the chat for who to, actually Lindsay did it better because you did it for everyone to who to contact. Although it's happening tomorrow, so it might be a little late, so we'll see. Now we will talk about our closing comments, and we will begin with Jose, if there are any closing comments.
I would just like to add support for in-person hybrid meetings, and thank you for showing up despite your circumstances, everybody.
Yeah, here. I support that move potentially in the future if we can get to partial in person. Also, Michael, thank you for your service. I've appreciated sort of learning from you in the past. Oh, I guess it's almost, I don't know, 9 months or something that I've been on the board, but your perspective has been really valued. So thanks for doing that, and good luck in your adventures going forward.
Well, I want to start by, so as some of you know, I live close to downtown. So there was a long caravan of law enforcement vehicles from EPD and Lane County and UO, like all sort of going down the street with their lights on, but no sirens. And there are a lot of people taking videos, and I took a look online to see what's going on, and it was there was a funeral today for former Lane County Sheriff Tom Turner, and so I just wanted to say that. I don't know if anyone watches these meetings, but in case anyone is watching them trying to see what was going on, that was what was happening. And As far as my my final closing comments on this board, I really wanted them to be in person. I'm sad that this wasn't in person, or at least hybrid. But this has been an incredible experience for me. You know, I came onto this board hoping to, with the hope of bringing some of my experience teaching and reading about criminal justice policy into a real world experience. And it turned out to be so much more than that. I mean, I hope that I was able to do that, but also certainly this has informed my teaching significantly, and also my research. I feel like it kind of reignited a new stage in my research, which then led to all kinds of opportunities, including moving to Texas. But if there's anything that I have learned studying law enforcement elsewhere and here, it's that Eugene is doing better than average, let's say, much better than average, actually, I think. And it does make me feel like this is a place that I could come to and retire and move back to, and I hope to do that. And look for me to be applying to be on the CRB in retirement.
Well, I don't know if Austin is as much of Texas as Baker City, as Eugene is of Baker City, perhaps. But one of the real pluses and surprises of joining this board was the presence of the academics and the contribution that they make. And Michael's, speaks to you and the other academics that are part of this group. But it really, it just has, I wasn't expecting it, and it's been a tremendous asset, and it'll be missed from Michael, your contributions. So thank you. And I didn't mean to suggest, I didn't mean to suggest that it was harsh punishment by the officers in today's case. I meant that the failure to provide the key and the lock at the beginning in the field may have been what resulted in taking the trip to the evidence thing, because it created trouble. It was a problem instead of just cooperation. And I don't think that it was a torture situation. And I just wanted to make that clear, because otherwise I wouldn't sleep. I'd toss and turn all night and think that, I was harshing too much on them. And I did appreciate that the officers, the insight that was demonstrated post adjudication. So I just wanted to put that out there. Thank you. Thank you.
Michael, so we came out about the same time, my second go round, and certainly there were times where we did not agree on things. There were times where I think I may even called you out for rolling your eyes at me one time. Yeah, but I think it went both ways. But I think if nothing else, you were always open to listening to things. Maybe not always in the moment, but it's certainly, I see where you and I both started and where we've come. And I appreciate that we both have been able to find that place where we can hear the other person and their background and perspective, and bring it to the discussion. Because I think if we all came from the same background and discussion, this would be a really kind of boring thing to be doing. It's why when I was first on the board, and Snell Fontes, I've mentioned him before, when he was on the board, grew up in Haiti, went to school in the South, was a doctor here in town, and he just brought a perspective to this board that was so different. And it just really helped, I think, coalesce our previous board the first time I was on into seeing things in so many different ways. And I think that's always the beauty of this board, is how it brings different sectors of Eugene together to discuss things that we all see, but interpret so differently. And I think the benefit of that is then it goes back through Cindy and Ryan and Leah to the police department as to what we as the community think should and should not be happening, and how they should how they might do things differently the next time, but still be within policy. I mean, even the times where they were within policy, we had suggestions for them. And I think that's what's so great about this board. Tell Bill we'll miss his bow tie, but hey, he'll come back and maybe watch one of our meetings. And I also appreciate that you brought up Tom Turner. I had the privilege of working with Tom Turner over the years when he worked with the Eugene Police Department before he went to the sheriff's office and then went to Florence. I mean, he was involved, as I recall, I'm not going to go into the details, but with a pretty tragic case that we had to review as the CRB. He just was always the kind of person that you just really walked away with saying, that was a good man. He just did the job. He did it well. And everybody I know that ever worked with him really appreciated him. He will be missed. I appreciate that there was the honor for him today by the various agencies. And that's all.
I don't think I have any other closing comments other than to thank you all for being here. We really appreciate the time that you all take to do this. It's not nothing, and it takes a lot of thought, and I really appreciate how this group has always been so cordial, even when we disagree. And I hope that continues with our new members. It's always a little stressful when we meet somebody new, and hope that they understand that the group can work so much better if we hear the different perspectives, but we hear them in a respectful way. So I'm always worried about that, but I'm sure it'll be fine, because it always is. All right. If there's anything else.
Thank you, Rob, Lindsay, and Madam Auditor. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming. Thank you, Michael. I'm sorry for not being in person.
It's not your fault.
I know. I'll see you. It's definitely not my fault.
You brought COVID. It's a Leia virus.
Oh, sad.
I'm so sorry.
All right, we will see you next month,
Thanks.
July 12th.
Night,
Bye.
everyone.